7:38 is the time. It's AM 650, KGAB Radio. My name's Glenn Woods. Thanks for joining me. For the caller on hold, I hate to do this to you, but I have a guest in the studio now. Do me a favor. Call back just a little bit later, and I'll go ahead and get you on the air. Dave Dodson is in the studio. Does the name sound familiar, Dave Dodson? You ran for?
U.S. Senate.
U.S. Senate. And you were telling me, and I think this is interesting, after you got done running, you slept for 5 days.
At least.
Yeah. Okay. And then is there a kind of a come down period after that? Because you're traveling all over the state and talking to people and so on. What's it like after?
It was strange, Glenn. We worked for 7 months. I say we, my wife and myself, but of course we had a team.
Yeah.
Never worked harder in my life. And then all of a sudden, one night, it goes from 100 miles an hour to literally zero. And you look around and you say, we don't really have anything to do today.
Yeah.
And so that cliff of a drop-off was something I'd never experienced.
Well, here's something. Now, of course, you ran for Senate, and you were on the Democrat ticket.
Republican.
The Republican ticket.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. You primaried. And that when that ends, it reminds me of all of a sudden there are, like the people in Florida that retire. With that void there, I see people come down to Florida to retire, and the first 6 months it's hallelujah, and they play golf every day.
Yes,
and man, that just sounds wonderful, doesn't it? Wow, after a while, there's no sense of purpose.
Yeah,
and if you want to see people get old and die fast, it's when you take away a reason to get out of bed every single morning. You gotta have that, or you're just done for. So now that there's nothing going on in your life, what did you do with your life?
Well, first of all, on the Florida story, there's been some really interesting research about how when you're not using your mind and the synapses aren't firing, it does actually, it's not just a state of mind, it's actually physiological. But so anyway, I basically spent some time going through piles and piles of mail and paid my bills and so forth. And then, I looked back on the experience, and for 7 months, my full-time job was basically walking up and down the streets, meeting people, hearing their stories, finding out what matters to them. And that was an extraordinary opportunity. It was the most fulfilling thing I've ever done other than being a dad. And so I wanted to do something with that. And I looked back on the electoral process, which I've always been skeptical about our electoral process. And, I think it's kind of a rigged system, which I do not in any way say that it would have changed the outcome in my contest or any other contest. But it's not a fair fight. And one of the things that I was observing is all these people who said, I want to be part of the political process. I want to run for office. I want to help my community, but I don't trust the system. I have to wait for someone to die in order to run for office. And so my focus has been on electoral reform at this point. And what I want to do is I want to return democracy to the people. And that's where all my energy is. So I have this sense of renewed purpose that I'm so excited about. I probably am as energized as I've ever been.
Okay, so let's do it. I know Wyoming is a bit unique compared to some other states as far as the way we do things. Just consider the size of the state and how it's spread out it is. So you're talking about something that's unique to Wyoming, or are you talking about the nation?
No, I think it's nationwide. I mean, certainly states and communities can have their own little idiosyncrasies, but congressional approval is about 20%. And re-election of incumbents is about 97%. You got to step back and say something's wrong. And it really comes down to this, is that politics is the only place in America where we're told competition is a bad thing. Everywhere else, competition is a good thing. And I think fundamentally what we need to do is we need to open up the system so more people can run and we hold incumbents accountable. So I think we elect a lot of good people, but I think they get into that system and they say, wow, I'm here for life. And my full-time job now is to get reelected. And how I get reelected, well, that's easy. I'm an incumbent now. Instead of to get reelected, what I need to do is I need to serve my community so that when I come back for a reelection, because I'm going to have 5 really smart people and really excited people running against me. So I better deliver or I'm not going to be able to get reelected. That's the kind of competition that we need in the system. And we also need to get more people to the polls and more people to vote, which is why I'm concerned about the current legislation.
Okay, hold that, because it was a great setup. More in just a moment.
Back to KGAB's Wyoming Wake Up with Glenn Woods on AM 650 KGAB.
7:45 is the time, AM 650 KGAB Radio. My name is Glenn Woods. Thanks for joining me. Dave Dodson in the studio. Name sound familiar? Well, he ran for Senate here in the state of Wyoming, and so you didn't get the job, obviously, but that's okay. You going to be back?
What's that?
You going to be back? You going to try again?
I don't know. My focus right now is really on trying to work on the
Just
system.
election reform. Okay, let's take a look at that system. I do know, I don't want to get too in the weeds with this, but when someone does get elected, let's say that, and they're in Washington, D.C., they get handed basically a call list, and they're supposed to every day work and raise money for the party if they want to get into the proper positions on different committees. If they want that reelection money, they have to work for the machine, basically. And if they're not raising money for the machine, well, the machine will try to do what they can to get them fired to get in somebody who will play ball. That's the inside Washington, D.C. machine. And on a smaller scale, there's a similar kind of machine even here in Wyoming. How do you beat that machine?
Term limits. It's really honestly that simple. I mean, imagine the easiest example would be the Senate. Imagine the U.S. Senate, 6-year terms. You have two 6-year terms. So at the end of your first term, you're going to go raise some money for your own reelection. Yeah. But the fact is that all the people who are writing you checks know that you're not beholden to them the day after election because you can't run again. And so that breaks down the system simply with term limits. You know, we talk about campaign finance reform and so forth and free speech and so forth. That is a complicated subject because it does involve the Constitution. And by the way, look at where Americans stand on term limits. And the other thing about term limits is that it tells somebody you need to get with it. You've got 6 or 12 years to do whatever you want for your community, and then you're out and the next guy is in. And so it creates a sense of urgency that I don't think we have in Washington, D.C. And there's a lot of people here in Wyoming that deserve a chance to serve their country or their state, whether it's in the state legislature or county commissioner. And we need to be opening up spots so we get new voices. I mean, God knows we're not getting stuff done now.
Right. Okay, so let's say we get term limits through, because I know here in the state of Wyoming, we had term limits, but the Supreme Court struck that down. So we'd have to basically change the Constitution in the state of Wyoming. So I'm not saying it can't be done. It's just not as easy to get done as, well, we're just going to vote in term limits. Because again, in order to vote it in, basically you're asking people in government to pass legislation to fire themselves. How do you get them to do that?
Well, it's interesting. The wise framers of the Constitution contemplated exactly this, and they thought there might be instances where we need changes in the Constitution that are not in the interests of the people in Congress and the Senate. And so it's the Convention of States, where the states petition Congress, and once you get enough states to petition Congress, it's 2/3. Congress then is out of the picture. They don't have a say in it, and the states get to decide. And that's what needs to happen right now. This is exactly why we have a Convention of States process in the U.S. Constitution.
So then, what about? Let's go back to a small state like here in Wyoming. We don't have a whole lot of people. Now I know some states have a big pool to draw from. There's going to be plenty of people who can run for one particular office. But we have a situation here. I know if you're running for the Senate, well, we have the 2 senators, 1 representative. But what about on the scale like here in our Wyoming House and Senate? There's some of these communities. It's hard to find any one person to run. If you got term limits, nobody's running, small town, you fix that how?
Oh my gosh, I just don't believe that. I just met too many people who said, I want to be part of the political process. I'm frustrated with, school teachers who say, I'm frustrated, or school administrators, I'm frustrated with our education system. I know how to fix it, but I don't get a seat at the table. Or healthcare professionals, nurses who say, I'll tell you how to fix the healthcare system because I'm living and breathing it every day. They don't have a seat at the table. These are people who could really contribute to our political process. But instead, we live in this world where you got to wait for someone to die in order to run for office. And
even then, the replacement is usually picked.
Exactly.
In many cases.
Exactly.
In just a moment. It's AM 650.
No radio at the office? Don't do without. Listen at KGAB.com or on your mobile with Radio Pub. Free on the App Store or Google Play.
7:52 is the time. It's AM 650 KGAB Radio. My name is Glenn Woods. Thanks for joining me. Dave Dodson is sitting in the studio to talk about legislation that would change some of our election processes here, including in the state of Wyoming, but around the nation. So this legislation you speak of, what's it all about? How's it work?
Well, what's before the Wyoming state legislation right now is to really lock down the primary system in a way that would give Wyoming literally the second most restrictive voting laws in the primary in the nation. And that's going in the wrong direction. So what happened is that after the gubernatorial race, Foster Freeze came in second behind Mark Gordon. And he said, well, it's because of crossover voters. It wasn't. I mean, the math is crystal clear that it was not a result of crossover voters. It was because the conservative vote was split 4 ways. So the answer that the GOP has put together, the state GOP, is, well, let's lock down the primaries and make it hard to shift into the Republican primary, because what they're saying is that there are a bunch of Democrats who came in and spoiled the party, which isn't what happened.
Right.
But here's the hazard with that. So what they're saying is basically, I think the original legislation was you had to join the Republican Party 2 months prior to the election. I think it was roughly 2 months prior to the election in order to qualify. So yesterday, I'm having a cup of coffee at Paramount, and I meet this guy, and he used to work in the union, and he says to me, I've been a Democrat for most of my life, but I'm finding myself more and more voting Republican. So I decided to become a Republican. I said, how'd you go about doing that? This is just yesterday. And he said, well, when I went to vote for the primary, I just registered Republican. That guy would have been turned away. He would have stood in line in the polls, and they would have said, you can't vote. It's a club you can't be in. Now, in the real world, by the way, the punchline, Glenn, is that his 2 sisters and his brother also did the same thing.
Right.
So here are 4 people who want to join the Republican Party, and we would say, nope, sorry, you can't join. Who thinks 2 months before the election to go to the courthouse and walk upstairs to the courthouse and change their voter affiliation? Nobody does that in real life. It needs to be one-stop shopping. So what the Republican Party is doing is they're basically saying, we're going to make it really hard to become a Republican. And the other area that'll hurt us is the young vote. The Republicans are dying with losing the young vote to the Democratic Party. And so what we're going to say to people who are graduated, 18 to 22 years old, is that if you want to be a Republican, you've got to go to the courthouse, and you got to go to the courthouse two months before election, and then you can have a chance to vote. We should be making it easy for them to join the Republican Party.
Grab your headphones real quick here. Caller coming in on that. This is Glenn, who's on the phone.
Hey, Glenn, it's Mike. How you doing?
Good, sir. What you got?
Well, I need to make one correction to what Mr. Dodson just got finished saying. Yes, Foster Freeze is whining because he lost. Don't disagree with that whatsoever. However, this is not new to the Republican Party because I introduced it to the platform 15 years ago. And it's been on the ballot. This is the 4th time, or not on the ballot, but in committee, 4th time. So this is nothing new. We've been trying to get this done for ages. It's not just Foster Freeze. And we are not the most restrictive in the country. And this is hardly restrictive at all. You can still change. It's just a matter of when you change, and it makes it inconvenient for the Democrats to cross over, which they have done and affected the gubernatorial race in the past.
Okay. Well, let me answer that, and we'll head out to Russell in Baltimore.
Yeah, so there were 5,400 Democrats who switched over to the Republican primary. Foster Freeze lost by 9,000 votes. Math is pretty simple there. Furthermore, we know from our own polling that a lot of Democrats favored Sam as well. So even if 100% of the Democrats voted just for Mark Gordon, it wouldn't have changed the outcome of the election. But here's the problem, and I want to solve the problem because we do have a problem here. Is we need ranked choice voting. Ranked choice voting is where you go into the general election and you put your first choice and your second choice and your third choice down. So it effectively it's a runoff, and that way in the state we always get the candidate that has more than 50% of the vote. I don't think the problem is a few Democrats crossing over. And by the way, I'm not in favor of crossover voting. Don't get me wrong. I just think it doesn't have an effect on the outcome. What does have an effect is that Mark Gordon won with 33% of the vote. He should win with 51% of the vote. And we need to have ranked choice voting in the general election that solves for that.
Okay. He has a formula for this, and I want to hold you off into the next hour because I know we're going to get some calls on it. Sam 650 KGAB Radio. My name is Glenn Woods. Thanks for joining me. Dave Dodson sitting in the studio with me. I remember him. He was running for Senate. And he went through the whole primary process, and the Novocaine wore off about a week later, and you're feeling much better now?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Sometimes it's more fun to be a former candidate than a candidate.
It can be, yeah. But I was just joining us. So what he's talking about is some election reform in the state of Wyoming nationally as well, but mainly taking a look at in the state of Wyoming what you would do different. One of the things I was thinking about when you were talking about crossover voting, and the problem I have is when, let's say, a Democrat will jump over, vote Republican, jump back.
Yeah.
And I looked at that as meddling. And to me, it wasn't a matter of were there enough votes to actually change the outcome or not. I just don't like someone who is from one party meddling in another party. And did you hear that recording that went out asking Democrats to do that?
I didn't hear that, but I heard
played
of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I played it several times on the air. There was actually out of Cody, a recorded message that was coming up on people's phones. If you're a Democrat, jump over to make sure Foster Freeze doesn't win and then jump back. Now, again, you're right. The numbers were not there really to change that. But still, I looked at that as, well, isn't that meddling? Shouldn't the Republican primary be for the primaries? For the Republicans, and the Democrats can go ahead and play in their own sandbox, and we'll meet in the general election. What about that argument?
Totally agree with it.
Okay.
But by the way, in the last primary, 701 people did that.
Yeah.
So we live in this world where you hear a story and it's a great story and it's dramatic and you tell it overnight. 701 people did that. That's
actually
it.
That was bad.
So it's not a big number. And you remember the story I was telling earlier about the guy that I had coffee with, or right after coffee.
Yeah.
He was just switching into the Republican Party. Now, so I don't know how anyone could advocate this sort of being a Republican for an hour and going back. Yeah. But that's why I'm in favor of an open primary that is not based on partisanship. And you just vote for who you want. And then in the general election, you do ranked choice voting. And, in that case, what would have happened is that Mark Gordon, Foster Freeze, Harriet Hageman, and Mary Thorne would have advanced to the general election.
Mm.
So 3 Democrats, 1 Republican. And then they run hard in the general election. In the general election, you go to vote just like you would normally, and you put your first choice down. But if you want, you can also put your second choice down if that person doesn't make it. Which we do that all the time, whether we're picking movies or what restaurant we go to. So it's how we live our life. So here's what would happen. Let's say that I'm a conservative and I like Harriet Hageman, but if she can't make it, my second choice is Foster. In the general election, votes are counted. If someone gets more than 50%, contest is over. If not, you have effectively a runoff. And so the person who came in last place is eliminated, and their votes are converted to the second choice. So my second choice vote was Foster Freeze, so he gets my vote. Right. So it's just a quick way to do a runoff.
Would we have to change the Wyoming Constitution to get that done?
I don't know if you'd have to change the Constitution.
This is Glenn, who's on the phone.
Hi, this is Lori over in Wyoming.
Yes, ma'am. What you got?
And I want to say the gentleman might have some points, but I beg to disagree with my experience was last August over here in Laramie. So I arrived, I want to say it was probably middle of the day for the primary, and the line was out the door. I vote at the Armory, which is right across the road from the UW soccer field and tennis courts, etc. And it was, I would say, 85 to 95% of the line was 30 and under. Stuff I have never seen. And normally there might be 2 or 3 people ahead of me, if any. And more young people just flocking and lining up. And the line was slow because of that line. I would say 90% were there to register that day. Nothing I've seen in the 8.5 years we've been back in Laramie. So I just think there was a lot of social media messaging to get them out and to register. And to register for whoever the social media get me in. It may not have happened in other counties, but over here in Albany County, that wasn't the only place I heard. Other polls had the same situation. So, and in August, it was weird. It was Twilight Zone. Anyway, that's
all right.
That's first-hand account. Thanks.
Thanks for calling. By the way, if you have any questions, 632-6500 or 888-503-6500. That goes back to something I was telling you during the break is we've changed a lot, just the way we receive information these days. And so much of it is on social media. That's where, as you know, from running across the state, going back and forth and trying to talk to people across Wyoming, yes, we are a little bit different. We're not as connected by social media as some other states, but still, though, that really does matter. So let's take a look at the idea of getting the message out. You want a lot of people to run.
Well, also, I just want to say one thing about Lori's comment, is that I was excited when she was saying that there was a long line of people voting and that there were young people to vote. And can you imagine, the current proposal, which we're rushing through, would require, as originally written, that you have to register 2 months in advance. Can you imagine if that line of young people who are energized and excited about the political process were told, oh, sorry, you can't vote today?
Right.
I want them to be more inclusive.
Okay. See, I have, and I know a lot of people disagree with me on this, every election cycle, I run my stay out the vote campaign. There's a get out the vote campaign.
Yeah.
The stay out the vote campaign is I would like to ask people, and I don't want a pop quiz, I just want to know, do you know who your mayor is?
Mm-hmm.
Can you name one of your senators? How many senators do you have, by the way? Do you know that? If you can't answer basic information like that, then what are you doing here?
Mm-hmm.
Why?
Mm-hmm.
Last thing we need is uninformed people to show up, which happens a lot. Grab those headphones again real quick. This is Glenn, who's on the phone.
This is Linda from Greater Laramie County.
Yes, ma'am.
I'd like to correct Mr. Dobson on that registering to vote. It doesn't mean that you cannot register to vote 2 months prior to the election. What it means is that you're not going to be switching parties in that 2-month period before the primary. Anybody who is a brand new register can register. It doesn't make any difference what your age is. If you've just moved into the state, you can register. If you are a young person who's turning 18, excuse me, prior to the primary, you can register. It's not stopping anybody from registering. All it's asking is that you don't play around in the other party's primary, particularly the Republican Party, which we have seen. We have seen some very close votes, even in our local races, where I am sure that a lot of people that have voted that crossed over perhaps influenced the outcome of the race. And all the Republicans are asking for is, please let us choose our own candidates. Stay out of it. If you don't like the candidates that's running in the Democrat Party, then run better candidates.
I agree with everything you said. I was just responding to what Lori had said, which she said that the people were there to register. So you're not correcting me, you're correcting Lori, and I was just responding to what she had said. I wasn't there at the time. But I feel like the real problem here, I mean, we don't have a mathematical problem with crossover voting, even though I am not in favor of crossover voting, don't get me wrong. The real issue here is that because we have a crowded primary, we end up with people winning effectively the general election, because let's face it, our general election is in the primary, with less than 50% of the vote. That's the problem we're trying to solve. And that was really, Foster's gripe, which was that the conservative vote was divided up 4 ways. And he was saying that the sum of the conservative vote was more than what Mark Gordon received. Now, I don't know who would have won if you had ranked choice voting in the general election, but this much I do know, is all of our elected officials would represent more than 50% of the will of the state. And that's all that we need to be doing, or that's what I'm focused on. And I don't agree with rushing through something that makes it harder for people to vote and harder for people to register for the Republican Party, because I want to increase the number of people in the Republican Party. And when I looked at the Secretary of State's numbers after the primary, and only 701 people did that switching back and forth, I'm thinking, that's not our problem. Our problem is we need to get more Republicans to join the Republican Party.
More in just a moment. It's AM 650.
KGAB's Wyoming Wake Up with Glenn Woods and Cheyenne News with Doug Randall. Filtered for accuracy through the handlebar mustache of truth. AM 650 KGAB.
It's AM 650 KGAB Radio. My name is Glenn Woods. Thanks for joining me. So what are we officially calling this? Dave Dodson is my guest, by the way. Rank choice voting? Okay.
It's just basically an inexpensive, efficient way to do a runoff. That's all.
Basically. Okay. Now, how then, you can't do it in this legislative session, but how do you introduce it, and how do you get this thing through? Because once again, some of the politicians that have been there for a long time wouldn't want to see this.
Well, an area where Foster and I are in agreement on, he wanted 2 things changed. He wanted to make it harder for crossover voting, which I'm totally in favor of, but I think you solve it by having an open primary, and then you've solved the problem. And he wanted to have a runoff. But the state kiboshed the runoff because it's expensive and so forth. There's a solution to it with ranked choice voting. It's just a way to do a runoff at the same time, so voters only have to go to the voting booth once. That's all it is.
Okay.
And so I think it needs to be introduced at a future session, one of the questions we have to ask ourselves as voters is the system working? Are we getting results? And if we're not, we have to step back and say, we got to rethink how we're electing officials and how we're incentivizing officials. And that's all I'm working on.
Okay, so the next step then, and are you going to push this because we have another year is going to be it's going to be a budget session. So you've got to work through that. You might be able to get this introduced, but it probably won't go anywhere because it's a budget session. So what I'm saying is essentially you got 2 years here to sort of work this out. That's okay because the elections happen in 2 years.
Right.
Okay. So we got to get this worked out somehow. Do you have a plan because you got to not just talk to the politicians, but talk to the people? Is this something you're going to be working on?
Yeah, so my energy is really around electoral reform, and the things that I care about are what we've been talking about here, term limits and getting money out of politics. Sure. And it just comes down to the simple notion that I'm trying to return the government to the people. And that's why I ran in the first place. I mean, of course, it was an uphill battle running against an incumbent, but you know what? Should it be an uphill battle, or should we have a citizenship where people can raise their hand and say, you know what? I'd like to run for office, and I'd like to have a fair fight at running for office. And I want to open up the candidates running for office and make it easier for them to run for office. And I want to make it easier for voters to come and vote and participate in the process. When we have a primary system where less than a quarter of the people show up, you got to step back and say, how do we fix that? And we can say, well, people should be more responsible. Well, yeah, but there's other things that we can do to increase voter participation.
Well, and then we have a situation where I noticed that not only Liz Cheney, but our senators barely even showed up for any debates or for the fight in the first place. Of course, and I'm not big on polls, but if they're looking at the numbers and seeing that they're so far ahead of anybody who's running against them, were I them, I might not show up either. I'm giving credibility to my opponent out there. I'm letting other people know that they exist in the first place. So why would a Senator Barrasso show up and debate you if you're not even a blip in the polls somewhere?
Well, he didn't. I mean, I got nearly a third of the vote, or 30% of the vote. So in the end, a lot of people were supportive of my campaign. But this goes to how we need to have a system that allows challengers to come in place. So it was very hard to campaign against him because he wouldn't show up for anything and he wouldn't debate me. Now, maybe if we debated side by side, people would say, you know what, I like Senator Barrasso better than Dodson. That's fine. That's a fair fight. But when the incumbent says, I'm going to pretend, he never used my name once, okay? When he pretends he's not in a contest, well, that's not a fair fight. And again, I'm not saying it would have changed the outcome, but I'm not concerned about Dave Dodson's campaign in 2018. I'm concerned about trying to make sure that we have a system in place where people will raise their hand and run for office, and they get a fair shake.
Well, now I have to throw in, because right away somebody will say, well, what about the money in politics? Because if you are Senator Barrasso, well, you've got the entire Republican machine behind the process there. But if you're just some guy who's, let's say, a welder who wants to run, and God bless him, please do. He probably has some great ideas, but he's not going to have the money to go up against that. Is there any ideas how to fix something like that?
Well, Wyoming Promise, which is a great organization, has been trying to get legislation through the state to address the issue of money in politics. And, one of their big supporters, not financial supporters, I mean supporters in terms of idea, is Senator Simpson. And you talk to former politicians, and all of them universally want to get money out of politics because they were disgusted by it. Right. And we don't have one man, one vote when someone can walk in with a bag full of money and effectively buy votes. And we know that we're not literally buying votes, but there's influence behind it.
This is Glenn, who's on the phone.
That's Duncan.
Yes, sir.
What I'd like to see on these ballots is at the very bottom of all these people, they have a little box, and next to it, it says none of the above.
I knew you were going to say that.
And I think you're going to get a very high turnout as far as
all right, let me wrap it up with him real quick, because there's something, okay, that's getting the money out of politics. But there's something about getting the money into it, because, again, go back to Bob the welder here. Well, if he doesn't have any money for advertising or signs or even just the gas money to drive across the state, what's he going to do?
Yeah. Well, I remember I got to know Rod Miller pretty well. He was running in the Democratic primary, and he was running against Liz Cheney. And again, I'm not saying that in a fair fight, Rod would have beat Liz Cheney, but they should have been able to stand side by side in debates, be sitting here with you, talking on radio. And so voters can say, okay, I understand Rod, I understand Liz, this is how I'm going to vote. And that's what we have to change, because look at the circus we've had for the last 75 days on our southern border, for example. I mean, politics is not working for the people. We have a third of Wyoming people cannot afford prescription or cannot afford their health insurance. And that's abysmal, and that's been going on for 12 years.
Okay, so if people want to follow you as you're fighting for this, have you set up anywhere where people can go or people can get in touch with you?
Yeah, my Twitter is Dave Dodson 307.
Okay.
I got a Facebook page, got a website, and trying to be noisy these days.
Okay. Squeaky wheels, you know. Thanks for coming in. It's AM 650 KGAB Radio or KGAB.com. Actually, you want to hang on because now the lines are lit up.
Sure.
I'll hold you through this break here at the bottom of the hour. For those callers who are on hold, you got two choices. No wrong answer. Either you hang on through the news break or you call me back on the other side. So I got Fox News coming your way. Then I've got to look at your weather forecast, dayweather.com. Spoiler alert, just cold. But at least it's not a windy cold out there. Then you and I get back into it, and I'm holding Mr. Dodson over, so you can go ahead and ask your questions. It's AM 650, KGAB Radio, KGAB.com. Temperature is 1. Light snow coming down in Cheyenne. We're at 8:30. Fox News happens now. 8:34 is the time. Temperature is doubled to 2. Light snow falling in Cheyenne, Wyoming. It's AM 650 KGAB Radio. Dave Dodson is my guest. You might remember he ran for Senate here in the state of Wyoming. Your phone calls welcome 632-6500 or 888-503-6500. This is Glenn. Thanks for waiting. Who's on the phone? He waited all the way through the commercial break. Now, is he still there?
Oh, are you talking to me?
Yes, sir. You're on the air.
Oh.
What you got?
Okay, this is Senator James out of District 13.
Yes, sir.
So I want to make a comment on the term limits. While I agree with the concept, the point is not to take that power out of people's hands. The reason why is because it's not our place to take that away. We need to make sure that they're informed. They don't. The reason why people. Sorry, I'm a horrible public speaker.
It's all right. Organizing thoughts. Go ahead.
Yeah. So it's a matter of making sure that they're informed, making sure that the information that they get is from someone that they trust, and they can make the choice. They're not getting involved because they don't trust anything a government official has to say. The media, excluding you, of course, is very biased. And so they hear all this information, but not knowing what is true, they're not able to feel comfortable in their choice. And this has come from, being in the, being one of the grunts, being people, boots on ground, I've never had my own business. I've been a worker all my life. So I've heard this my entire life. And, that's just my thoughts on it.
Okay. Well, let's see what he has to say. What do you think?
No, first of all, thanks for the service. I just appreciate people who are, kind and thoughtful and want to make their communities better. And that, I'm a citizen. And so I appreciate that. And one of the things I've been talking to some experts about is whether we can employ libel laws with political advertising. It's tough with the candidate, but especially with PACs. I just don't understand why, to your point, someone should get up there and say something that is blatantly false. Opinions are one thing, but blatantly false and mislead voters. So you and I are pretty aligned. And again, thanks for doing what you're doing.
All right. Anyone else have some questions? 632-6500 is the phone number, or 888-503-6500. Dave Dodson is my guest. We're talking about just election reform in general in the state of Wyoming. Have you written this up as legislation yet, or is it just an idea in your head?
No. What happened is that after the election, as I said, I sort of slept for a week or so, and then I was looking around saying, well, how can I make a difference? I'm not a candidate. I'm not a public official. And I thought, well, one more person in a system that's not working, may not be as impactful as working on trying to fix the system. So that's where my energy's been. And I spent, the better part of 6 months just looking at what the problems were and where the leverage points are and where you can improve the system, because there is not an American out there that thinks it's working right now. You go down the list, whatever your cause is, immigration reform, healthcare reform, we're busting the budget. We hit $22 trillion in deficit. Nobody can say this. Nobody can say it's working. So then you eventually have to step back and say, maybe it's not, we need more of my team and less of their team, or we need better people, that there's something structurally wrong with our system. And there is something wrong with our system. So that's where my focus is. And I I bound out of bed in the morning and I work on this all day long because I care so much about my state and I care about the country. And I'm not happy with how things are going, as is almost every American.
This is Glenn. Who's on the phone? Hello, you're on air. And he hangs up. If you want to try again, 632-6500 is the phone number, 888-503-6500. Well, there's a bit of a process, though. And I always want to say, Wyoming has a good old boy network. Every state has a good old boy network. No matter where I've gone, they get into, even both parties will get into their cliques where they work together, and politicians will maintain that power. We'll hold that thought because I want to go somewhere with that. This is Glenn, who's on the phone.
Hey, Glenn, Rob here.
Yes, sir.
How did the people not beat? This guy got beat more than 2-1, 74,000 to 32,000 or something like that. Who is this guy anyway? Never heard of him.
Okay, go ahead.
Look, I'm not talking about my campaign, and John Barrasso beat me solidly. This is not about Dave Dodson at all. This is about electoral reform. So,
okay, so you do end up with a clique, and I do find on the D.C. level, the Democrats and the Republicans do work together even to maintain that power.
Exactly.
So I think I'm not saying this is an impossibility, but a big part of it is, so maybe if you can get some reforms through so we have term limits, if you can get that done. But it's about breaking up a network that's been there for not just decades, but generations.
Yeah, so what I think we've gone from having three branches of government, the legislative, the executive, and the judicial branch, to two branches of government. We've got the Democratic branch of government and the Republican branch of government. And that is not how the system was supposed to be set up. And so we need to return that as well. Because you're right. I mean, the two most exclusive clubs in the world right now are the Democratic, political elite and the Republican political elite. I mean, the one thing they can agree on is they don't want competition.
Okay, actually, I add an extra branch of government that most people don't, and that's the bureaucracy. Once they get in there, they're entrenched, and they're now a lawmaking body.
Yeah.
And then try to get rid of that. It won't be easy. This is Glenn, who's on the phone.
Morning, Glenn. This is Chris.
Yes, sir.
Hey, one thing I would like to see, and I think would help with voter turnout, is I'd like to see them put in effect a law that says, you only got 2 months to campaign before a primary, or maybe 3 months before a general. When we carry these elections out for 2 years, by the time it comes around, most people are like, you know what? I'm totally sick of this. I'm not going to go vote. We're so confused over the issues and the advertising. And I think we need to limit the advertising, too, and the money. It's like, you can have $100,000 to run your campaign, and that's it. So we, just tone it down to where people aren't so overwhelmed with what everybody's talking about.
That is a thought we already have. Thanks for calling. We already have people running for president. As soon as we're 2 years out, we already have people announcing that they're running for president. How much can we take here?
Boy, as a candidate, and I am a political outsider. I'm just a regular person who decided to run for office in terms of regular meaning politics. I would have loved the caller's suggestion, which is for 2 months, everybody fights the best fight, and then the best person wins. All I'm advocating for is the best person should have more than 50% of the state's vote.
This is the KGAB Wyoming Wake Up with Glenn Woods on AM 650 KGAB, where Cheyenne comes to talk.
8:44 is the time. It's AM 650 KGAB Radio. Dave Dodson is my guest, and he, of course, ran for Senate in this past election cycle. But now he's just trying to find some way to get election reform in, not just in the state of Wyoming, but across the country. But let's go back, because I think your main focus would just be here in the state of Wyoming. Is that where you're starting with this, or do you want to expand this idea out across the country?
Well, both. I mean, right now, this is my state, and it's hard not to pay a lot of attention to your backyard. So obviously I'm most interested in my backyard. And I also, we're the equality state. And I know some people sort of throw that around as a slogan and don't really mean it. But I actually do, from being on the campaign trail for 7 months and talking to people, I do think we're the equality state. And I do think we're looking around saying, you know what, this isn't quite working the way I want it to. And we're a small enough state that I think you can get things done. And just like we led the nation on, ending the disenfranchisement of women, which gave us the name the quality state. I think we can do that with election reform too. And how proud would it be if Wyoming was the state that led the nation on election reform?
Well, I think there's always unintended consequences. You got to think those things through. But you don't see them coming. Like, for example, Colorado's working on something right now. They would no longer participate in the Electoral College. Oh, sounds like a great idea. However the popular vote goes, that's how Colorado's going to vote. Well, they love that idea. Unless Trump wins in a landslide, then they're going to hate that idea and want to go back to the Electoral College again. Do you worry about, as you think of your ideas, are you searching for those unintended consequences?
Sure. And, a lot of people have given it, I have the advantage of having run and been in the trenches and lived it. And the way I describe it to people is you can read the sports page, you can watch football, but unless you've been on the line of scrimmage taking hits, you don't really understand the game of football completely. Yeah. So, I learned the game of politics when I ran for office. Marry that with all the people who have given so much thought to the process and the unintended consequences as well. Yeah. And I think the solutions are there. But, by the way, you look at polling, Americans want money out of politics. Americans want term limits. You go down the list. A lot of it is basically creating a way for Americans to get what we've wanted because our politicians have put a brick wall in front of us and said, I'm sorry, our jobs are more important than your will. Your will. And so, a lot of it is really just implementing what we all know intuitively need to have happen. And we all have to ask this one simple question, which I mentioned earlier. Is the current system working? Is it working for you? Okay, just look at our southern border. Look at our national debt. Look at our healthcare crisis. Is it working? And if it's not working, we have to step back and say, it's our country. That ballot is owned by us, and we have to take charge of that and say, you know what? We have to fix the system. If not for us, we fix it for our kids or our grandkids.
Okay, what about, because as I hear you talking about this, I think of reforming also recall. And the reason why is there's times that somebody winds up in office, talk about unintended consequences. No one really wanted that person, but just, sometimes this is a game of chess. It's not just a game of votes. This can be like a chess game. Someone winds up in office. Oh, my God, what did we elect here? How do we get rid of this person? We could be stuck with them for a while.
Glenn, I really actually haven't given a lot of thought to recall issues. Normally elections are often enough that if someone is really horrendous, they don't get reelected. But this also goes back to something we were talking about before about how I feel like we have two branches of government, the Republican branch and the Democratic branch. We put in a system of checks and balances for exactly this reason, so that no one person has too much power, and there's checks on those power. There's checks on that power, and we need to adhere to that system. And you were talking about Colorado, and as you were describing that, I was thinking to myself, you can't in politics, just like in football or anything else, you can't have a set of rules and then say, well, I'm going to adjust the rules, or I'm not going to pay attention to the rules when it doesn't work for my side. You have to believe in the rules and say, this is how our government is based. This is our Constitution. It says we play by these rules. Even if in a given day or a given year you don't get your way, you always honor the rules more important than whether you got your way that week.
There is a problem, and I've seen this kind of a thing happen. There is a problem where when a newbie shows up, let's say, and they show up to the Republican convention where the meetings are going on, the hands are being raised, people are asking questions, and you've seen the process that they have to go through. Talk about Robert's rules, and the new guy, he's actually treated as if he's an annoyance for being there. Again, there's your old network again. There's a lot to clean out here, even of the the convention process.
Yeah, well, that's why, I don't know if it would apply to the convention as well, but that's why I think term limits are really important. If nothing else, we're getting some new, fresh ideas.
Two callers on the line. This is Glenn. Who's on the phone?
Yeah, just what you on me here, Glenn?
Yes, you are on. Okay, yes, go right ahead.
This is John down Pine Bluff.
Yes, sir.
I would like to see the money from out of state stay out of the state of Wyoming's politics.
That's interesting. Let me just go ahead and jump on that one real quick here, because I had heard a lot of complaints about that. Even Liz Cheney went way out of state to get money to bring it back into the state. What do you think?
I agree with John's notion, and I would love to try to get, in general, money out of politics, and especially when you've got big check writers who couldn't care less about what happens in Wyoming, and what they're really doing is they're influencing votes that don't affect Wyoming voters. in Washington, D.C., so I totally agree with it. And you know what? It doesn't have to be so expensive to run an election. The earlier caller was saying, do it all in 2 months. Voters can get all the information they need on the candidates in 2 months easily.
Yeah, but there's a lot of, having said that, there's a lot of people, there's advertising, as you know, there's signs, you got to put your billboards up, that can run up quite a bill.
Yeah, but I mean, John was from Pine Bluffs, and I remember when I was in Pine Bluffs for the candidate forum there. You know, if you pack that place with voters who are interested in the candidates, and the candidates all get up and speak, you know, for me, that and radio, honestly, are the two best ways to communicate with voters about what your ideas are. Not a 27-second ad. I mean, you know, I did my ads, and everybody else did their ads, but I never felt like I was really connecting with the voter, and I never really felt like I was getting my message out. So, you know, get money out of politics and tell candidates that they need to start walking up and down the streets like, you know, most of us challengers have to do, and they got to show up to the candidate forum in Pine Bluffs, spend some time on radio, and then the voters know who they want to vote for.
This is Glenn, who's on the phone.
Hi, Glenn. It's Lisa.
Yes, ma'am.
Sorry. I would just like to say thank you to your guest, because this is like the first election season that I've seen candidates who didn't win but are still involved. And I really appreciate that they didn't just take their hat and go home, but they saw that the people in Wyoming care, and they're getting involved in the process. And I just really appreciate that, and just wanted to say thank you.
All right, more in just a moment. AM 650, KGAB.
For breaking news in Cheyenne, the power's in your pocket. Grab the all-new KGAB mobile app today at the App Store or Google Play.
Gonna squeeze in one more caller here. It's AM 650, KGAB Radio. My name is Glenn Woods. Suddenly I can't talk. You want to take over? You're on the air. Who's with me?
Frank, up here in Torrington, I just want to comment. The Democrat Party is not the Democratic way. A lot of people use that term interchangeably, but it is not true that the Democrat Party is always democratic.
All right. Thanks for calling. I appreciate that. Well, that's next thing. Okay, it is a good point. We are a republic. We're not a democracy. We do things slightly differently, and for good reason. Why? What if somebody hits you with the criticism? Well, if you're doing it the way you want to do it, then you're going to more of a popular vote rather than a Republican way of selecting people.
No, I don't think so. I think I think all I'm advocating is to end crossover voting.
Sure.
And without making it hard to become a Republican. Sorry, but a little pitch for the Republican Party. I don't want to make it hard to become a Republican, which is the current legislation is going to. And then the second is, I just think whoever is representing us should have more than 50% of the vote to say, I represent the state. Mm-hmm. That's all. And we do that all the time in runoff elections. This is just an efficient way to do a runoff election. And I worry a lot that the current legislation, we're just rushing something through that is not really going to reform the problem.
Would you keep, if you had enough people get in, which we've seen happen, so there's no way someone's going to get 50%, would you just keep running them until they did?
Yeah. So ranked choice voting, you just eliminate well, 4 people advance to the general election, so you don't have to wait that long. So, the bottom person gets eliminated, and then if no one gets 50%, then you bring the third person out. But, usually either someone hits 50%, or when you eliminate the 4th person, then someone hits 50%. And then, by the way, I do not know how the gubernatorial election would have come out under this system. But I do know this. If Mark Gordon was our governor, everybody would be saying Mark Gordon has more than 50% of the support of the state. And that's a better place to govern from as well.
Okay. Well, and then especially when people come to take a look at his decisions over the next few years, I didn't vote for him. You'll probably see bumper stickers that say that at that point. Okay, so again, let me wrap this up real quick. People want to talk to you about this. Where do they find you? How do they get a hold of you?
Dave Dodson 307 is Twitter, and I'm a regular columnist with the Casper Star Tribune and the Laramie Boomerang. So my email address is there, and got a Facebook page, and so love to talk to people. That's what I miss about the campaign.
Yeah. All right. Thanks for coming in. I appreciate it. So we're coming up on Sean Hannity's Morning Minute. After Sean Hannity, it's going to be Fox News, and then we'll take a look at local news with Doug. Update on your weather forecast, dawnday.dayweather.com. Then you and I get back into it. By the way, you can follow all of this plus legislative news and weather at our website, KGAB.com, or download the app for free. We don't charge you for any of this. So news updates and weather updates, and also your favorite shows, just by hitting the Listen Live button. It's AM 650, KGAB Radio, or KGAB.com. Sean Hannity comes your way right now.